Grace, peace, and mercy are yours from the triune God. Amen. When I was growing up, I went to this big Baptist camp, which was very unlike our Lutheran camps that we have here in Colorado. Think like 400 kids every week in the woods. Tons of counselors. It was like its own little city. Worship services were really loud, and kids jumped around, and the counselors and junior counselors were star celebrities. They were the coolest. Amazing. They knew all the cool Christian songs and knew all the secret fun actions and had all sorts of goofy inside jokes that campers all would try and clamor around to try and be a part of. So, of course, being awestruck, when I was old enough, the summer before my freshman year of high school, I applied to work there too. And y'all, I was pumped. Finally, I was going to be the cool staff that knew all the inside jokes and songs. I was going to be the star. And then I got my assignment for the summer. I was going to be the night janitor. Needless to say, my summer did not shape up the way I expected. As it turns out, I would not be the cool junior counselor with all the glory and fame. I would wander around at night cleaning bathrooms. My life would not be full of excitement and attention. And I remember complaining about it to my supervisor, who later would become a dear friend and mentor of mine, who I often think about, and he took me aside, and with a bemused face, he said, "But Nick, that's not what we do here. We don't have that kind of fun. We are janitors." And then he just looked at me. My expectations were way off. And now I had a summer to come to terms with that. In the text for this week, we get part 2 of Peter's proclamation of Jesus being the Messiah. If you remember from last week, Jesus just asked the disciples the central question of the gospel, "Who do people say I am?" To which Peter replies, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God," which is a good answer. But his understanding of the Messiah is the Messiah that Jesus actually is different. And now we get the opportunity to explore that space between his expectation of Messiah and the reality who Jesus is as Messiah, because it's the same incorrect trap the church has fallen into over and over for a really, really long time. The disciples, remember, are in Caesarea Philippi, which, as you might guess, is named after Caesar. And the temples to Caesar, who claimed to be the Son of God. It's important to know here that Messiah at this time is not necessarily that unusual of a word, but the name and title of Messiah is not how we understand Messiah. Messiah is tied to the Christian church now, right? But Messiah was typically thought of at this time to be a military leader. There were lots of people that claimed to be a Messiah, someone with a lot of power, earthly power, military. So when Peter suggests that Jesus is the Messiah, what he really means is, Jesus, you are the one who is going to finally and actually free us militarily, geographically, and in real time from the Roman Empire. Why does he think that? Because he had seen all that Jesus had done. Jesus was powerful. He could cast out demons, cure the dying, summon angels, walk on water. This is not an ordinary person. And here, outside of the temple of Caesar, after Jesus explains to them that he is going to suffer at the hands of the empire, that he is going to be executed by that empire, of course, Peter pulls him aside because this is not how messiahship works for him. No, Jesus, that can't happen this way. Run into that temple and take over. Come down with your angels. Show the empire your power. Force them out of here. Replace Caesar as Lord. Sit on that throne. Show them who is boss. Take away our suffering. Make it perfect. Give your people your power. Sounds a lot like the devil tempting Jesus in the wilderness, doesn't it? Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan," because it is a tempting offer, but it is not the way Jesus' kingdom will come about, and it is not the future he has laid out for his disciples, including us. Glory and power is not the way of the church. What Peter is asking from Jesus is actually the lie that we all chase too, the trap that we fall into. Call it pride, call it turning in on oneself if you want to be really Lutheran. Call it status. It is sin's power over us that keeps us stumbling, and despite the world telling it as the way to be saved, the way to finally be realized and worthy, despite even some churches declaring that the way of Jesus is centered on might and power and getting our way all the time, it is not. It is tempting, but it is a stumbling block. That chasing after that kind of power leads to our destruction. The way of Jesus and the kingdom that he is bringing about, the way of the church, is the cross. The way of the church is not might and glory and pride and the idea of everything being perfect if we just follow God. That is not the promise of God, though it has and continues to be a promise a lot of Christians will fall into. We have heard this lie repeated, right? It's this idea that some folks will try and sell that if we just really throw ourselves all in, give more, be better, whatever that God is going to make all the other crappy parts of our lives go away. God will save us from failure. God will save us from not getting our way if we just fill in the blank. Some folks even think God is going to come in with an army and fix all the stuff that we don't like, that we Christians should find our own army and do the same thing and fix all the stuff we don't like with guns or an army or whatever it is. And that's a really easy thing to sell because in the end we get the answers. We get what we want. Instead, though, what we get is the worst marketing strategy in the history of anything, but it is the truth. Instead of a messiahship and followers of glory, we get a messiahship of the cross, and if we are to be followers, we have to pick up that cross too. And that's a hard thing to sell, but it is a good thing. I would argue the best thing. Notice, though, Jesus doesn't tell us to go find a cross. We don't have to create our own crosses. Sometimes this text is used to manipulate and control, but that's not what Jesus is doing here. There is no self-flagellation necessary to be a follower of Jesus. We don't need to create our own crosses. Jesus doesn't condone suffering in any circumstance. That would be destructive to life. And Jesus is not about destroying life, but creating it. Rather, our crosses will come to us. It's just part of life. Why? Because we are humans that are supposed to be living in human community. And when you live in community and stand up for those who the powerful in the world, those who have been given into a different kind of messiahship based on the lies and the promises of power, the crosses naturally find us. The suffering of discipleship happens when the people of God are living full lives based on the reality of love and grace. When we are following God by loving people that the world hates, when we are loving self and loving others Because the world, the way of Caesar, the thing Peter mixes up about, the empire does not want that. That love and grace is the little thing in the cog of the machine that just messes everything up. It's the sand in the little computer chip that stops the program of hate and power from firing correctly. Jesus is telling Peter and the disciples and us about following him, and the good news for us is that it is not some empty promise of trying harder. Jesus is going to save us, or that Jesus is going to save us from this horrible suffering in life, because Jesus is not removed on a throne from our suffering. Jesus isn't in the temple of Caesarea Philippi, far away, languishing in power. He doesn't take that bait. Jesus is grounded in reality with us in our lives, which includes our crosses. When we will encounter suffering. We will. Bad things will happen. But here is Jesus, and Jesus is encouraging us to walk with each other and to pick up our crosses together. Jesus is calling us into a life centered on real human experience, true life. And Jesus is calling us out of the lies of promised glory that pull us out of reality, out of real life. Because all of that glory and chasing after that perfection, it is tempting, but it leads to emptiness, and it does not last. The thing that lasts is the way of God. It is serving each other. It is loving each other. It is walking in one another's pain, and it is experiencing grace and acceptance even when we forget, lose our way, and trip over that stumbling block for the 80th time. When my supervisor sat me down and told me, "But Nick, we are janitors," what he really meant was, I think, "Nick, why are you chasing after glory? That is a lie." And I was a counselor a summer after that. And the counselor's life was not perfect, wouldn't you know it? The fame that I saw was, of course, empty. It had its whole other set of issues, things were not better when I was trying to be someone else. And being who I was that summer, engaging in the community the way I was meant to, sharing the gifts out of the space that I was already in, and serving the people out of my skills was where I found joy. Jesus doesn't provide us an escape, that kind of messiahship. Jesus stays with us through every part of our real life and shows us that just like everyone else was serving out of their own skills, out of their own real life, picking up the cross through simple service, through belonging to each other, was and continues to be the way of discipleship. It is out of losing one's own expectations of personal glory where we find true life, full of deep grace, true beauty, and full revelation of God's goodness. It is remaining close to the true cross of Christ and the crosses of others that we find the true messiahship of Jesus. It is in the cross that we find life. Amen.